Hey guys, welcome back to Coffee Economics. My name is Abe. Today we're doing a Newsweek review. Last week I had a week off and this week I'm back and I'm going to try and cover all the news that I missed out between last week and also that has come up this week. So without further ado, we'll get into it. And the news stories today are Gabon's blue bond deal, which will be an interesting one to discuss, Nigeria's record inflation, and lastly, we're going to be looking at Ruto's flip on the fuel subsidy stuff, which is going to be an interesting one to discuss as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so the first story I'm going to look at is Gabon's $500 million deal to restore its coastline. And what they're doing is a debt for nature swap, where some of Gabon's debt is going to be reduced or even forgiven, so that they can, in exchange, they would protect some nature like the oceans and things, so that they conserve it and stop it from being degraded. So this concept of debt for nature swaps has been something that's been around for quite a bit of time, particularly in South America, and it's something that is quite new to Africa. I'm not sure if Gabon is the first or second, but it's that new to Africa. This is a deal that has not happened very often. What will happen is that, Gabon will have reduced debt obligations, and then the people who are doing the swap, which will be people who are outside Gabon, tend to be Western countries and environmentally conscious type of creditors will say, hey, do not use this portion of sea, water or land for any development. Try and conserve it for the biodiversity of that section. In theory, it sounds like a good plan, but there's some general misgivings about these types of deals. For one, the debt forgiveness or reduction in debt obligations is not that large, and that seems to be the case with this story. From what people have analyzed, the deal have sort of suggested that it's not going to be that much debt forgiveness given how much debt Gabon already has. So it's not really making that much of an impact for them. It's something small, but it's not a massive dent on their debt obligations. The other question that I have that is more philosophical and also about more ethical in terms of the nexus between economics and ethics is that with these deals, sometimes what happens is that if you decide to conserve a piece of land or area that has been used for people's livelihoods, particularly if a nation is underdeveloped and developing, people who use that source as a means of income are excluded from that or told not to use that because now conservation land. There might be jobs created by, having enforcement officers, but the net loss from that kind of move can end up being greater than the net gain and for the people. That's not to say that preserving nature will not have significant benefits to people, because everything we do in economics is based on the natural capital that's in the world. So it's based on either the air, the land, or water. So we cannot do anything without any of those elements. They're essential. So my key question is that hopefully the Gabon's government is going to be strategic in saying, okay, if people cannot fish or do their business in these areas, how would they be supported in terms of finding alternative opportunities for work? Because this might be just a short-term deal just to say, hey, let's try and get our debt obligations down, but with no real thinking about how it is going to support the people of Gabon, particularly the poor people who do not have other means of earning money. Because the issue with environmental degradation within developing countries is not people just want to degrade their natural environment. It's not by people being, having a lack of appreciation for their country or the beauty of their country or their resources. Is because the way the economics are working in that country pushes them to the point where they need to do things to survive, whether it's be cut down trees or fish. And if people have no idea how much, for example, fish are in the sea or within that local region where they can fish within their national borders for waters, and sometimes people can overfish and then it can cause a collapse of that ecosystem, and that can have quite catastrophic consequences for the economy as well, particularly the local economy of that community. This deal does not absolve the government or give the government a get out of jail free pass from doing the right things that set up the economy in a way that restores the natural environment so it can benefit people, and also empowering people. And government has a role to empower people so that they can do occupations or use land, water, and the air in a way that would have no negative effects in terms of the natural, in terms of nature, in terms of its capacity and beauty and other benefits that nature gives us. So this is an interesting thing that's happening, because there's also a broader topic around these deals is that climate change is a big issue, and one of the ways to deal with climate change is to preserve forests, to preserve soils, and allow the natural environment to have that ability to be a carbon sink and store carbon and reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So if this is going to be a trend that people are going to use, we'll forgive your debt so you don't use land, but then there's the people stuck in the middle. This is going to be a recurring pattern that will happen, and it's something that people will need to sort of consider. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out within the next few years or decades, whether this will even have any impact at all. So the next story, we're turning our attention to Nigeria. So this is not surprising, but it's also like shocking how quickly these things are happening as well. Nigeria has hit an 18-year high of having a 24% increase inflation year on year. That's like almost a quarter of, that's like things are 25% more expensive than they were last year. And that's like crazy if you think about how Nigeria as a nation is not one of the wealthiest countries at all. It's probably one of the poorest according to UN data and all that sort of data. So it's quite frustrating, and it's quite concerning how quickly inflation is getting out of hand. As you can see from this chart, it's rising steadily. It doesn't look like it's slowing down at any time soon. So the key factors that have been causing inflation to rise is that there was the effect of COVID and supply chain issues, but that's mostly has died down. If you look at data in terms of the cost of freight, particularly shipping containers and the like, the value or cost of that has gone down significantly. It's gone way down from the peak of COVID. Other stuff has sort of stabilized as well. But then, there was the Russia-Ukraine war, and it's caused grain prices and food prices to rise and oil prices to rise as well. But Nigeria is an oil producer, which is another basket of fish we shouldn't open in this short conversation. What's really driving the inflation in Nigeria is that there's been two key policies that have happened, in that Nigeria has removed its fuel subsidies, and the impact of that is that by removing those fuel subsidies is, fuel gets more expensive, which increases inflation. But as well, because of the way Nigeria's energy sector is structured and the strength of it being quite weak in terms of there's not regular supply of grid electricity, so electricity from your power lines, and manufacturing, and everyone relies on petrol products for energy. So making fuel price go up has had a multiplier effect on every other part of the economy, because that's the only key fuel that's really available at mass and at scale for people to do business, work, and pleasure. So even though maybe the policy was sort of as just, affecting just a small sector in terms of, fuel for people to, use to get to work, but because the way the energy sector is set up is that many people use generators for different things, to run the electricity in their businesses, or to run their heating and cooling for their homes, to power the schools' energy needs. It's having multiplied effects, I reckon, across the whole economy. And to add to that as well, the government decided to deregulate the currency, so make it free floating to an extent. And that's meant that market forces determine the value of the naira, which means that people, if they feel like there's not much value in terms of the naira's value fall. So that means people have to spend more to import fuel, because Nigeria is a net importer of fuel. So coupled with that, you've got no more subsidy for fuel, plus you've got increasing costs for importing fuel. And fuel is pretty much the lifeblood of all the sectors in Nigeria. You're seeing that all these costs are being passed on to consumers and from business to business, depending on where they are in the supply chain, which is making inflation go up. And I think it will keep accelerating if the government does not decide to intervene. So what this means is that we might end up seeing a reversal in the government's policy in not too far into the future, because if inflation starts going over 25%, even 50%, or I don't think they'll be able to just ignore that for any longer, because petrol has a massive impact on Nigeria. Like I said, it's the lifeblood. So it'll be interesting to see this space. I think this is sometimes where policy can fail, and a misunderstanding of economics can fail if you don't really understand the structure of the economy. You might do the policy at the wrong time. It might be the right thing, but it can be done in the wrong way at the wrong time and in the wrong structure. So my last story, talking about fuel subsidies and looking at backflips, just like as I mentioned in the previous story, Kenya's President Ruto has decided to reinstate the fuel subsidy, and for about 30 days after people have protested, and there's been a few riots and all that sort of and the like. People are saying cost of living is too high, it's too much. It's not, we can't live under this kind of pressure in terms of cost of living. So Ruto, to just give you a quick backstory, has embarked on a policy of increasing taxes, removing subsidies, all with the key aim of being able to help Kenya be able to meet its debt obligations. So Ruto has been going around the world really talking about this and saying that we need a better financial infrastructure for Africa. We can't be paying interest rates of 8 times more than other countries. It doesn't make sense, and he's right, those rates don't make sense. He has gone and done all these policy reforms to increase revenue so that Kenya does not go into default on its debt, because that can even have more major consequences for the economy. But now, even though those policies are good on paper, we are kind of seeing how theoretical policy, or policy within the parliament chambers has a real impact on the livelihoods of people in the streets, or in the masses, I should say. So now Ruto has been pushed to the point where he has decided, look, we're going to have a 30-day period of returning the subsidy, and I think it's not going to work, and I'm going to give you my reasons why. So this policy is not going to work because, for one, it's 30 days. If you're a business person and you know that you've got the subsidy is going to go back going to be removed in 30 days, you might as well say, look, maybe I should make a bit more money during those 30 days, or why even bother change my prices, because then I have to rejig my prices again after those 30 days. And also, I think people will be in the frame of mind, okay, like maybe I should buy everything I can within these next 30 days, because there's limited supply as well that will keep prices up. So even though Ruto, because people might decide to hoard, that's why I'm saying that prices might go up. People might decide, okay, I'm going to hoard as much fuel as I can while it's cheap, so I don't have to pay that much later on. So all these factors will come into play, and then we might see not much change in the fuel price, not because Ruto's policy was not aimed at alleviating the pain of people. It's just that people respond in a way that maximizes their benefit. So if you, as a household person, for example, were faced with this situation, I reckon if you were told, fuel is going to be cheap for the next 30 days, like maybe even 50% cheaper, you would go out and get some barrels, empty barrels, go to the petrol stations, as many as you can, fill up those barrels. So when the 30-day passes, you have cheaper fuel. But you're not the only person who's going to think about that. Probably hundreds and thousands of people will be thinking that way and do that same thing, and you just have prices inflated again. Businesses will do the same, prices inflated again. So even though it's a nice political tool, I think, for him to say this, but I think the impact might be prices might not really change. Things might not really change. I think policies only have an effect if they're more like permanent or look permanent to people, rather than just short term. So unfortunately, Ruto has said it's a 30-day thing. I don't know what he could have done in this situation, unless he introduced something or reduced some of the taxes and made that a permanent policy, or make it even long term, make it over like a period of you know, 3 years, because 30 days is not going to really do anything for anyone. It's just going to make people just panic buy and just buy as quickly as possible. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, make sure to hit the like button, and I'll catch you guys in my next one. Bye.